To start with, I welcome Ms. Sudha Raman, an IAS officer currently serving as the member secretary of the State Planning Commission of Tamil Nadu. She handles governance innovations, including Tamil Nadu innovative initiatives, and established India's first Center for Innovation and Governance. To my left is Mr. Satyagraman Chakra, Satya is the Urban Strategy Lead at the Rainwater Foundation. He brings 3 decades of experience in using tech and data to solve urban issues in mobility and energy. He is the host of India's premier urban affairs podcast, Rural Labs, so do check that out. And he was also the bicycle mayor of Bangalore. We have Mr. Vishwanath here. He is popularly known as the Rainman. He is a civil engineer and urban planner with 38 years of experience in the water sector. He is the director of Bio-Environmental Solutions and trustee of Bio-Environmental Trust. He's a member and contributor to multiple alliances and is author of the Hindu's Waterwise column. With Dr. Purnima Dore, she's a practicing economist and CEO of geographies and former director of Analytics, Insights and Impact and Data Plus. She is recognized among the top 100 analytical leaders in South Asia. Her research covers macro-regional growth, smart cities and local economic development. Mr. Sanjay Sridhar, Sanjay is Strategy and Policy Advisor at the Urban Movement Innovation Fund. With over 25 years of experience in architecture, planning, governance and sustainability, he is an Eisenhower Fellow and previously served as the Regional Director in public cities. Professor Pradeep Talbar is Associate Professor in Climate and Sustainability at the Institute of Technology, Mumbai. I am Bombay. His award-winning work covers water supply, wastewater management, sustainability assessments, and circular economy. With interventions recommended by the Ministry of Jal Shakti for nationwide adoption. Ms. Archana Tripathi is here. Archana is the Chief Executive Officer of SAPAS. She brings over 2 decades of experience that spans various sectors, from satellite systems, urban technology design, and circular economy solutions. Post joining SAMAS in 2016, she has led the organization's collective initiatives to the scientific and decentralized waste management systems across India. We have Pooja Tendulkar here. She is co-founder of Venue Green Solutions Limited, where she promotes tailor-made eco-friendly solutions to environmental problems. An environmental biotechnologist, she has worked on duckweed-based research and applications spreading level. Most recently, she has been supporting National Youth Climate Consortium as a member of the technical research group. Mrs. Sandeep Paul is co-founder of the Urban Lab, an affiliate urban designer with experience in the transport sector. He has led urban design projects in Kochi, Pune, Mumbai, Spokane, Surat, and Bengaluru. He is previously the Center of Excellence in Urban Transport at University and partner to planning and implementation of the bus traffic light system in Ahmedabad, Surat, and Ahmedabad. We also have Dr. Samriti Bharwa. She is our own internal expert, program head of sustainable agriculture with food, land, and water program at Ahmedabad. She has over 3 years of experience in rural development, agriculture innovation, and interdisciplinary research, with a focus on designing and evaluating intervention for sustainable food systems. Thank you all for being here. To start off, we'd like to go through a video that Moses will show you. It will be an interesting way to show you our work in regions and what is here for you.
Cities stand at a crossroads. While the national economy is currently the faster than most of the world, behind the story of progress lies a simple underlying fact that 1/3 of the economy is directly dependent on nature. From the air we breathe, the water we drink, the fertile soil that feeds us all, we are all falling under immense pressure, and haphazard urbanization is only going to further exacerbate this. In the current backdrop of climate change, extreme weather events, vulnerable livelihoods, and shrinking natural areas, one that's taken over under the weight of difficult questions. Can our cities develop in harmony with nature? Can urban futures in India balance economic and ecological aspirations. It's no longer really about managing our cities. It's about tackling the deeper problems that shape them. This calls for the reimagination of our cities and how we can sustain. And here lies the vision behind the India's Thriving Eco-City Regions initiative. Eco-city regions are being promoted as regions that are ecologically resilient, economically productive, and socially inclusive for all. We build upon a place-based approach, ordering and integrating regional geography, contextual knowledge, and interdisciplinary approaches that ensure that solutions that shape resilience are right-sized, co-creative, and fit for purpose. Over the past 3 years, WRI India has been working in partnership with government, civil society organizations, sectoral practitioners, and communities across 6 diverse regions to support decision making and implementation. Eco-city regions are the reason to drive systemic change and not completely towards regeneration. The idea that cities and people can actually give back as much as it's taken from the earth. Working together to restore biodiversity, preserve cultural roots, and boost local economies, all supported by strategic community-led planning.
As Abra, India is very proud to have supported organized regional spatial strategy that lays the foundation for balanced growth that is rooted in its land, its culture, and its aspirations.
Rural areas depend on each other. So looking at whole region helps us see where services are working, where there are problems, and how benefits and burdens are shared. This integrated approach helps us to protect the environment, create new opportunities, and support fair and equal growth for everyone. Where we create place-based and fit-for-purpose infrastructure for small towns that ensures sustainable development, triggers economic growth, and ensures a decent quality of life while keeping the roots and character intact. Our work in UP aims to support these transitioning areas, finding ways to address the issues and provision services in these emerging cities needs to be rooted in their context and empower them while remaining adaptive to changing conditions. Where our city regions can grow sustainably and are well serviced, connected, while accounting for planned development, especially with much of urban growth happening outside municipal limits. Where we build watershed-sensitive design that can preserve our natural assets, address the big problem of solid waste management, and strengthen capacities to tackle rising urban challenges. Where vulnerable geographies address the interconnectedness of urban systems through comprehensive regional planning, which integrates climate resilience.
Glimpse of our work. We also have a presentation that explains some of our work in regions and what the transitions we've been aiming to achieve. But before that, I'd like to go to Satya here, because Regenerative Foundation has this thesis of what encompasses place-based thinking. And Satya, if you could hear me, focus on that, and then we'll move to our conversation.
Sure. Thanks a lot for the opportunity. Nice to be in this area. The Regenerative Foundation is trying to bring back what we have not been, the uniformity of solutions that we have been working in this space of growth has not accounted difference of qualifiers like decentralization and all that. If people themselves do not have the means to understand what they need to ask for and how they need to visualize their place. And that in essence is what we want to bring back and see from there looking at analysis. But trying to link back to eco-cities, the reason we got excited by this is why is the constitutional way of looking at it has boundaries in the political nature. The ecology doesn't have those boundaries. So in order for a city to thrive, it needs to not just throw a lot of action, consume more than what it needs. It also needs to account for all the ecology that surrounds it. And now, in today's world, it extends very wide and vast. But at the very least, contextually, these can be to account for consumption and the destruction that the city stops because of their wants and needs. How do we envision that? So these geographies of economic regions that these needs make the city region, different aspects of it take different views for action, different watershed. Whereas the consumption might be slightly different in how we vision that. So the balance that people on the ground need to do, practitioners like the planners, like working on this, begin to see it differently from rather than just the political boundary of what the city is. And that in essence is what we believe is the way we need to look at it. Otherwise, we will always live in a cycle where we don't understand what's happening outside our life. Right? The illusion that we have in the city is what is it causing? And how do we be regenerative inside of the city and in the region itself? I believe it's only a start. This is the start of some sort, which begins to lay the boundaries of eco-sensitive economic growth and not being blind to it. Now, if it extends beyond, then it begins to have a set of far and right. We will account for it that will be emergent over time. But we need to look at cities as not just cities but as city regions. But there are a lot of work I have mentioned earlier with the chief work also is that water flows in many different ways and ways of defining the water for inside the city or the water. So there are these complications that we need to tackle when we look at ecosystem and hoping that understanding and including the wider region, whatever it might look like, beyond political boundaries would be a start, and that is what I think we need to work for. Beyond that, I think especially about all of this work out there around with people. And today, there are a lot of choices being made which doesn't include them, which doesn't seem to recognize their needs, but it will pressed on them by other courses or by centralized planning, which are about what they want to do, what they want to provide, what they want to consume. And that's also being decided in how we ultimately become consumers of a place rather than become citizens of a place. And these are the concepts we use to understand how action on the ground can be more effective. We also believe that it has to be collaborative approach, especially in the non-profit sector, where we need to collaborate with each other, establish complement activities, understand how we can work these to be able to do as much as possible. And we like to be cognizant of how that comes together because again, standardization is happening and multiplicity of actions are happening. We see on the ground because we don't have access to other information, so there are different sets of activities. There are enablers in a place who don't necessarily give a solution, but there are solution people like water and things. How does this all come together to enable people of the place to be more in control of how their place is growing and be cognizant of the things that we are not visible, that is not visible to them. That I think is the underlying way in which we approach helping people do that work.
Thank you very much for that survey. Inviting that philosophy because we also deeply believe in a place-based approach. And Amrit will now make a presentation. I will show what are the transitions to be time to achieve in these 6 stages that we work.
Thank you, Vijay. And I must say it was very, very heartening to hear what you shared, Sudhaji. Because if I tie it up with the morning session and now, I'm from Tamil Nadu. So Chennai is my hometown, and so it's so very, very heartening to hear, because we've also known when we some years back, a lot of this had come into question, and the fact that a city can build back somewhere and show that bureaucratic energy as well as institutional determination, if that's the right word. You are rattling off all your facts and figures because it's clearly something that's you're working on day in and day out. So, and I think a lot of us in the room believe that administration and administrators have it to make it happen, and good partnerships with folks here. That's I think the connector that we're talking about. So, thank you so much for sharing that. And just I think touch upon 2-3 things that came to mind while I was looking at this. The first thing I think in making this joining of the dots between ecology and economy is that these are very fragmented discussions. The whole plans also happen in a very separate way. And so for this group, I was part of this conversation last year also. I've seen a lot of the same names, same people back again in the same room. This does not happen very often. They're the same set of people across different places, unless they are part of a program that they're implementing together, and so you're having like a partners meet in that spirit. And I've been now in for 20 years. This is not continuity, I think, is a missing link in making some of these plans happen. I mean, all of us around the room will agree on that. Staying with the problem for a long enough period and joining the dots, I think, is where some of these answers are going to be about. For funders to have that staying power and support those ideas for a longer period. For the institutional mechanism also to be such that, say, the genetic metropolitan group is taking it forward even after the person who was anchoring it has moved on, and now it is moving on to many other places. So I think there are lessons to learn from our own ecosystem that can be cross-pollinated to other cities, to other places. Two is, I also feel that when we were looking at some of the data, and here I had the opportunity to, when I was with the directors, I had the opportunity to be part of the city data initiative, where across cities we built some of the capacity building programs for city data officers. The first time that GR got designed, we were part of writing it up. What capacities need to happen within a city to make things like this happen? So there, having the city data officers, that infrastructure and ecosystem, making that strong, I think is a very important pillar. And we saw repeatedly about evidence with data, and more cities being able to have the capability to do that. I would like to see maybe, more inherent ways in which budgets within cities can be used for capacity building for their own teams. A lot of it has started now. I think we need a lot more of that to happen in a consistent way. And deeper ways in which even measurement of what is the value of the economy of the city. If we are saying that we are making this investment because we believe that the economic growth is going to happen through amount X, we need much more granular information to be able to say that. And we need to triangulate it with the ecology part of it, so that building permits, licenses, all of that, there are these checks and balances. And if we are making trade-offs, there are no trade-offs, which we are also planning for. And if we want to choose not to make the trade-offs, where we are saying that no, if this approval is not there, we will not make it happen. A lot of the environmental clearance narrative needs capacities on the private sector side also. So I think that there is a capacity story definitely within government, but I think many of us here are practitioners. I think how to create more capacity where private institutions also can partner more effectively in these things: environment assessment, measurement, data, if data related analytics need to be given. I've seen cities in other countries where they have teams with them which do a lot of this. While some of it may not be publicly funded today, maybe are even when cases are being made with multilaterals for funding for India, etc. I think creating slices for some of these in select cities with a mix of big and small is going to be a very good. The third concept, as I stop here, is I think there are a lot of local solutions which are coming up, which have very good economic value creation possibility. So EV and the charging infrastructure is one kind of example. But these new ecosystems, which are going to be around energy efficiency, which could be maintenance, management, I think there is a capacity building story there where even training institutions will do well. Because young people who want to get trained in it and will have local job opportunities. That is also, I think education is also in a way employment creator, a value creator, economic value generator. So thinking about this, and in a few cities, if one is able to do it meaningfully in India, I think there is opportunities elsewhere. And lastly, I think I was in Bhutan and Korea are two countries I had the opportunity to visit sometime back. And I found that some of these countries have really used their inherent strengths in a way that sets the tone of how growth will happen. So, for example, the way Bhutan has used the fact that it is in an ecologically fragile place. And for that reason, anybody visiting Bhutan as a tourist has to pay per day to stay in their country. And people do it. So that is a revenue generator for their exchequer. They are placing it up there that our natural culture heritage is important to preserve, and if you are coming there, you need to maintain these guardrails. So thinking creatively and innovatively with pride about, I think one thing I would like to add is pride in the strength of individual cities, pride in how we are different, and not trying to be one size fits all. And there's a very good picture you put there. We end up trying to be modern, and a lot of local indigenous groups are worried about urbanization for that precise reason that we don't like to go to our own old cities because we feel बहुत ज़्यादा modern हो गया. So how do we curate that in its own as the strengths and create pride, local pride around that? I think can be part of some of the methodologies which I think you be included as part of your puzzles and propositions. Thank you.
Thank you for discussing local design and local strengths as we move forward. And come to this question, we've spoken about sort of very urban areas, and I was talking about a number of initiatives on whether it's wetlands, biodiversity sector, and maybe other the economic perspective as well. However, water as a system continues to be, always in the news. Like right now, the amount of monsoon we're getting in Delhi also is a surprise. So we're constantly water insecurity, whether it is excess in terms of floods, whether it's drought, whether it's contaminations. There's a range of concerns around water that we have. Our question to you is, we've heard you speak a lot about water systems for all biomes, types of regions. How can such approaches scale? And more importantly, how can place, whether it's local actors, whether it's the knowledge that they need, how can we do this in a way that it sustains and becomes more sustainable?
Thanks for that question. It's very interesting to see the value of the tools and the fact that the applications that we've been having since a long time. So I respond to your question very quickly, but I'm getting what I've done from in the metropolitan regions. One is small. One of the key challenges is the challenge of imagination. We don't have the institutions to do the imagining aspect. We recently had what the government had, but then we can accept the data that we have to see the five operations. First, we have values of course in research and which is a place which has the plan. The on actually 45 places. Now, that's the region that we put in talk about, and that's the region that we plan. Or that solution is simply ours. So, how do we get this version economic ownership? We go after this region and we go after this habits and what kind of solutions we create. second student I would want to make is the very first the farmers of Lebanon had been massive went on fast for 1,198 days to protest land acquisition. The land acquisition was 40 years to start, 1,300 acres, 40 years to start. Now here are two imaginations of the same clash. With the imagination of the industries and the city itself, economic engine, $350 billion is the GDP package. It's funny, figures, which imagines itself in the heart for economic growth, for intelligence, and the various pathways to power. And then there are the farmers who say, no, we want a land for irrigation. Correct. That is the question. Right. In this first case that I ever thought, the farmers part. We talk about the farmers doing the cheap thing, and that's not like it. But as we get more now, how cities deal with these livelihood issues and imaginations of land for fertility? Now, when it comes to water, the water needs of farmers are different from the water needs of cities. Pollution requirements, pollution measures for projects. So, at the heart of cities and of nations is who owns land and how is that land used to be different. And we have not found out. In the peri-urban of Bangalore, we see large many communities and apartments buying up huge chunks of land and creating urban forests. We will be standing at the kind of facilities that exist. But what does national need to hold? And as I said, we will have issues, we will down the government and struggle. So, clear dichotomies are not the paradigms that we have in which we need to work with. Take water itself. What nice things in our cities to do it. And we could have done a lot better beforehand. Is to restore these practices, treatment, society, from courts, from the media, from everybody. Now this becomes a very important water for the planet. But the major water chunk of the planet comes from the valley. The cities start with this. Unless the innovation is taken care of, the cities will have to damage. Who is taking care of it? We're fighting for water with the What is no institution which is taking care of the sustainability of the regenerative nature of the river basin itself, which needs of taking away. The last one I want to do is that I want is for the solution. In Bangalore, by accident, by 70, we are now building the paradigm of the city as a make consumer of water as a resource. You will make polluter of data and how to consume water. Can we turn the city into a water factory in the fertilizer factory? Can we take the water spectrum of the city, treat it in the decentralized system and make what people contract we have, through adequate standards, conflict to fill the needs of the optimal districts of Goa and Goa. Roughly a population of different distributions of the planet. Potential is 2,440 million liters per day. We can irrigate us with supplementary irrigation to 30,000 hectares of land. No, then what? And so the city can be a net generator of resources which keeps the getting and the user with their agricultural systems active and it designed that these lakes can be obtained with work at a scale of some plants. That potential is there. So there's biodiversity for the farmers. In terms of responsibility of the state. So you're talking about the class of economic, but you're capturing the ecological benefits that you have there, as well as the justice and equity benefits which come to the margin that we have to pay up. However, it means that we need to recognize at some point in time that there is a certain amount of language that has to be found there. That is the net absorption of nutrients, the solid waste that we generate, which will be composted, which is correct waste. Can only be absorbed if agriculture and land do their absorption. And we have find that there are composts which are available in apartments, which this one can't cause simply because the distance to be transported doesn't require. So these kind of baseline uses thinking has to occur at a scale for which we do not have institutions and we do not have a legal framework, the institutional framework and the legal framework for us to support. This is not just to be free, but this is the work we do. We need to build these people, we need to build the legal framework, and we need to build these discussions around these challenges that we have of equity access and justice and see how we can focus on these issues and if we focus on the problems that we face. If we don't, we can do all the technical solutions that we can. We can not integrate the problems. That's
Thank you very much, Mr. Vishwanath. In fact, Satya, last week we met people who are working on the Leh Ladakh restoration strategy. We were actually talking about how, because all of the vegetables and everything that's produced goes out, the soil is so nutrient deficit, because it doesn't come back from the city. And we're like, the cities are getting nutrient dense and the regions are becoming deficit. So we just want to sort of shift to something actually, who's an expert. And so everyone, we're getting some, whether we do wastewater, we can remove through the rates of potentially agriculture. So there are many solutions of how cities and the rural areas can work together. But you also then, from an agriculture point of view, face on the city pressures, more demands, consumption patterns changing, in regions like areas where the policies are not so properly, because that's what the urban areas are demand is we're actually putting in policies to grow all these crops. But the question to you is, what measures should city regions prioritize? One, to safeguard food security. Second, is for ecological governance. How do they face up to the challenges of urbanization, pressure on land, and consumption patterns?
There are three parts of the question. When you said it is right, I'll try to. I'll try to remember and go one by one. It's a long question. So, first, let me touch upon the most obvious theoretical parts of the answer. When you ask me what should city regions do to safeguard food security, the things that I should say, I also prioritize, but it's important to say are these. First, integrated land use planning. These are rather many, but I will relate it to the presentation that Arvind was making. So yes, integrated land use planning and preservation, which is very important, which needs to protect agriculture. It needs to develop a framework that integrates food systems. Going from integrated land use planning, we need to foster urban integrated agriculture and also food security. Then promote reduction of food waste, because in the urban setup, there is a lot of scope of seeing to that the food that we already have is utilized properly. Shortening supply chain, that's a bit of a lot I occurred to you saying. So really shortening the supply chain between the urban setup and the surrounding food producing pockets. Anyway, let me put it that way, then putting it maybe rural, not rural, urban, peri-urban, but wherever food is being produced, that's supply chain which is addressing. If we could shorten that. Green logistics, obviously talking about now lower emissions transport is very important. So these are the few things we need to look at. Now, coming to how from food security, what do we need to really look at? So when I was going through the presentation, we saw a lot of landscapes. We saw Borderland, we saw Srinagar, and Uttar Pradesh. So when we say one size does not fit all, we need to reflect a little bit more deep. Borderland is a landscape, Borderland is not a town, it's not a district. It's a long part, long landscape covering many districts. And then we see Srinagar. Srinagar is a city standing in Jammu with one important city. And Uttar Pradesh. Now, Uttar Pradesh deals with, I think, a lot of cities, a lot of urban, peri-urban areas. So, when we do this kind of moving the hats between areas, we also need to see what is the history, what is it that they are serving, what we can do. So, when I say Uttar Pradesh, and I take my thoughts towards Eastern Uttar Pradesh, I'm going to Gorakhpur, and the area around Gorakhpur, what they produce, this Siddharth, Kishanganj, these areas. So Gorakhpur is a small town. I mean, we don't have a city there. The main town which may be addressing the urban, the food, the facilitating the usage of the food, taking the right trade corridors, the engaging the supply chains, must be the gateway, must be Gorakhpur, I presume. So what works around Gorakhpur may not be the thing in the town. It may be very different. What lenses we need to use.
coming from Uttar Pradesh to Bodoland, now Bodoland is still, I mean, also I can say with a lot of authenticity because I'm from Assam. But I'm not here to talk about Assam, but because the example was here. So Bodoland is much more virgin that ways. I mean, when Arvind talks about built up region, I was really writing notes and thinking what, and also was checking online, what is a built up area? So built up area is basically infrastructure that human is putting up. So I'm really comfortable thinking that we need to put more built up area in Bodoland, which facilitates business, which gives them visibility. But when we are saying we want to expand the city region, what we are really talking about? Is there a city? First of all, there is no city. There are small towns. So in the context of coming back to agriculture, so Bodoland is not, somebody also discussed with me, Bodoland is very organic, we need to support. Bodoland is not organic because we choose to be organic. Bodoland is organic because maybe the modern agriculture did not reach there. So when we work in a region, we need to really see how are we supporting the competitive advantage of that area, either the product which is coming from the in and around urban or rural pockets or the food producing pockets without saying rural and urban. If there is therefore Bodoland, there are specific products which grow in the in and around area. Can the urban setting facilitate either connecting them to a trade corridor or become the trade corridor itself? For example, you are talking about ADC done by somebody. So if somebody is doing ADC there, we may not really need a city region to support ADC, but we may need certain infrastructure. We may need a bank, we may need transport, we may need the road, we may need the digitalization, the connection, the know-how. All of these should reach Bodoland either in the urban format or not is a different discussion that we need to get on. So have I answered all the questions? Is there something that I left out? Ecological balance. Ecological balance, yeah. Thank you for that. So yeah, this is a very, I get sustainable agriculture, and this is very tricky. And when we work with farmers, I'm talking from agriculture person, starting from the rural setup, I go and right away tell them that we are working, these days the government is focused on natural farming, including crop ecology. It's we get a deaf ear, very difficult to hear. Before we do a cost return analysis, we then think, that this is what we do last season, this is what you're going to get. Because people talk big, but all that we do in these rooms impacts somebody's monthly income. And that, at least in terms of agriculture, I can say this is not salary, this is one season, one income, how it goes. So, while doing so, if we want to do things in an ecologically balanced way, really want the soils to improve. This version I was talking about water in the urban setup. So, water in the rural setup is equally in this. This is not, the story is complex here. The story needs that all of us look together from different angles, the policymaker, the one who is engaged on the ground, be it the urban setup or be it in the rural setup, connecting together. It's easy to say use green transport, but is that green transport really available and affordable and accessible to the producers is the question we need to deal with. So yes, ecological balance is very important, but to work on that well, at this point of time, where 80% of farmers are small and marginal, we cannot undermine the economical balance. If somewhere we can hold on to economical balance and move ahead and promote ecological balance, we will strive faster.
Thank you very much for that, Samiti. In fact, some of the topics we took at the university are very complex, actually very complex systems. We needed multiple things. Only the young people cannot handle these kind of complex topics, and somebody's been also working with us, whether it's a forestry, smart agriculture. And I remember the first visit to us about the came by, he said, looks like it's not organic agriculture. And she said, it's primordial. They haven't received the tools and the pesticides yet to figure out they can double decker or triple decker those are learnings over there have been tremendous. I now hand over to my colleague Elena to take the next round of questions.
Just keeping from some of the questions that we've been talking about on how to balance growth and regenerative systems. Before we get into more localized changes, coming to the question on finance, because as we were talking about this chat, we have a challenge of not being able to imagine. So I wanted to draw, Sunny sir's comment on how do you think we can reimagine the role of finance, not just public finance, actually more traditionally maybe really insufficient, but also private and philanthropic capital to try to see how to lead this balance between growth and resource sustainability or ecological preservation. How do we turn this whole idea of climate cost into long-term investment into our city regions, urban areas, or large metropolitan regions, which concentrate a lot of the jobs, people, and infrastructure.
Thank you for having me here. I think there is, I've started with a different background. So I'm now sitting on the other side of the table where we are running. So I think there is growing awareness of, and its specific focus on India, that the Indian system is set up in such a way that typically, I'm making a generalization, that typically national governments have the money and policy, state governments have the regulatory power, and cities have the power. So how do you bridge the three levels of decision making so that money is channelized in a manner that it addresses challenges on the ground in an evolving understanding, even within the underground table and all of these growing conversations I have. Number one. I think the point that Vishwanath brought up is absolutely spot on. I mean, having worked in planning departments in the US and in Europe, we don't have a department for economic development at the city or state. The way it doesn't, which does not set a healthy growth plan in terms of what do we want the economic development to look like. In terms of what sectors, do we have skills, do we have the institutions to train them, do we have the infrastructure to support it, do we have the resources to manage. Nobody is doing that. Neither the state is doing it, and the cities definitely won't have the ability. Forget the authority, I'm just talking about ability. So unless we create that focus, I think some states, Tamil Nadu is a good example. Karnataka is beginning to think of it. In fact, tomorrow I head back early tomorrow morning because there is a meeting with the CM and deputy CM in Karnataka to really create that institutional mechanism to reimagine the state, but then look at certain city regions. Belgaum, Bangalore, Greater Bangalore, but also Mysore region also happens to be a serious constituency. But a key indicator to that growing awareness is that there are only 4 cities in India that cross over 250 billion in revenue. Only 4. There are cities who are aspirational. Pune, Chennai, Hyderabad, Ahmedabad. The next 4 are coming through. Right? Both in terms of population, but also economic growth. Those cities are committing the same mistakes that we did. So where is the learning? If we built flyovers 20 years ago, and we are now putting signal lights on top of flyovers, we dismantling cars because they simply weren't designed to handle the volume of growth that's happening. Not traffic, talking about growth. Unless we are able to put together an ecosystem that is supported by multiple philanthropies, which addresses the end-to-end capacities in a great example is the EV acceleration that's happening. Every state wants to be an EV manufacturing hub. That should be not possible. There are some states that are already manufacturing hubs. Haryana, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu. Right? They have their bases, they have their skill. Can other states become part of the EV ecosystems? Maybe one state does battery research. Because there are specific skill sets for that ecosystem that is required. Therefore, the complementarity. But again, then the question becomes, who convenes that? And that is the role of the national government. They are not doing that. And I think there is a channel for us to bring that. But even within the ministries, there is a bit of lack of coordination between power, and So the question is, we have to find a mechanism to bring those pieces together. But I think the key to your point here on if we were to reimagine what can public and private philanthropy or public money and private philanthropy do, I think the alignment between philanthropy is the philanthropic organizations themselves are not on the same page in terms of take the EV acceleration. Some philanthropy believe that demand side is the only way. The other one believes supply side is the only way. But if some national governments in India don't have the ability to look at EV adoption, EV adoption simply will not grow at scale that we need. And then the question of waste, what do we do with the batteries after the life cycle? Nobody is talking about that. Nobody is talking about labor and reskilling. Big states like Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, who have 26,000 buses, they have a large labor force. And we're going to run into union problems if we start to get rid of the labor. Because you have to retrain an entire youth, and that's where the next key piece, which is the one that we may have, is we are increasingly now looking at youth in terms of both reskilling, in terms of economic opportunity, jobs, but also in terms of changing their lifestyle choices. Because at the end of the day, the youth of this country will inherit what we could not solve and also inherit what we created. Right? So they are the inheritors of what we leave behind. So at the end of the day, that youth is something. So we are working very closely with communities, and some of the examples are there in terms of how we look at engaging communities at scale, both at the ground in terms of economic opportunity, but also helping them reimagine in the scenario of climate change, how are those economies going to change? So those economies are changing by the day, whether it's because of water or because of heat or because of the lack of transportation. And as you rightly said, overland has not gone that way because it hasn't reached there. It is for a better reason that it hasn't. So the key is, it will eventually. So what can you do to get community-led groups to be more aware of the choices that they are making the choices that they make today will have an impact over the next 20-25 years at the regional scale. So I think that is some of the things, and I will end this by saying that reimagining cities at regional scale, there is nobody doing the reimagination, as you rightly said. And I think there is a role for grant-making organizations like us and several others in India but also globally to do the planning, to help them reimagine what that vision should be. And that it's easier said than done that cities have to be economically prosperous, socially equitable, and environmentally sustainable. But the tools and pressures of working inside government are very, very different. And I think that reimagination has to come from inside government, but also from the people who put our leaders in their offices. the stuff.
So, I think the point on learning from not just our mistakes but learning before you get into several sort of lock-ins with other places is quite important, and really segueing into our next section where we're also thinking of then how do you think of right-sizing infrastructure? Professor Karmar, I want to ask you, from your perspective, what do you think right-sizing means so that we don't fall in that trap between the mega structures that we build which don't serve us in the big cities, but also not being able to do the basic provision of foundational sort of services that cities, smaller communities, local settlements may need. So how do you understand how to provide for this long tail of India's urbanization where their needs and scales will be different, but they will continue to transition? So how do you build an infrastructure which will keep in mind this dynamism?
It's definitely thank you for that. So, person in my left and right who has said, and then what it has said itself is going to answer, and I'm happy that you have provided giving us some better information. So, that's rarely happens, but I'm fortunate to be here on this very right. So, Kodima said we have to make local green pride. That's a message I got from her. Vishwanath said institutions and governance. I would say institution memory. That is what is missing here. More and more our knowledge is outsourced to consultants, and those are not local. That's another problem. Even if it's considered local, I'm happy with local consultant, but we are finding very little kind of people are surrounding. Some cities coming here, adding how this practice, how to do our business. I'm working on very closely water sector, which is not the government going to. So, really, for example, I'll give you, and then I'll come to the question of scaling. How to provision water in India. Historically, we have been doing it. And there are very old traditional approaches which are there, which are basically forgotten. If you take a case now, we say saying we should have 24/7 water supply, and we have all the foreign consultants coming out trying to teach us 24/7 their ways of doing things. And then we should be paid in the big city. I know the cities in Maharashtra which had 24/7 in 1980s on done by our government engineers. The only problem is nobody has documented it, nobody has tried to replicate it, nobody has recognized them. That's the problem, and then we have to call on other foreign people to teach us, which is very sad. So we have some great radical shaft-based system. Shaft is a water tower, which I see in olden cities made of bricks. We have forgotten that, and we have gone for these storage tank-based systems, which is not working for cities. And then the entire knowledge, current knowledge, is come from colonial times, Western times, then the urban planning knowledge, all engineering, business, business. Everything we have been taught is how to standardize, how to make this thing modern from the context of which we may not like, and that's what you see that everywhere we go, this city, small city is wanted to go for underground drainage network. It is not essential at all. When the population density doesn't support, there is no capacity to operate and maintain these systems. So problem starts from there that we have not defined the problem itself correctly. And that's what my collaborators in social sciences or humanities teach me, that try to define the problem correctly. And we are not doing that so far. Defining what urban itself, like Madam said, that we cannot have technology itself, what is urban for us. So coming to the scaling of the infrastructure, with the standardized knowledge, all the media, the project reports are highly futuristic for 30 or 50 years. And we planned an infrastructure for that so much long today. We have created another problem for ourselves, that we have this both-side infrastructure, and the hydraulics that engineers believe that this infrastructure is commissioned in a particular way doesn't behave when it is commissioned in the current year, because the flows that it has with the result data are for future. And nobody is there to control because institutional mechanisms are not there to control that flow. Any water that comes in will be fetched, will be taken out because there is no continuity in the water. So we have reached to a phase where I would say that we don't not able to segregate between what is the problem and what is causing that problem. So causative relationships are very difficult to analyze in urban problems. So this knowledge of how to scale infrastructure that we are working on. So we missed many opportunities of scaling our infrastructure correctly to fit to our local context. We have missed an opportunities to in many large cities, which Sanjay was saying that big cities have made mistakes. Those are rather than living in our system. We have made the mistake, and our other smaller cities want to make the same mistakes again. Just because Mumbai's have gone for a highly centralized one water treatment plant, it is a proud thing. Mumbai's climate is in place. Why can't we city cannot have 10 or 15 decentralized water treatments in different ways, different technologies, local technologies that will give a diverse way of doing things and solve this problem of scaling. And so phase-wise planning, scaled approaches, too large system doesn't work for our scale, our cities. That has been demonstrated. That most of our SPPs are for namesake doesn't work. Bangalore has gone for building level interventions, building a Mumbai big cities. Building level SPPs, treatment plan doesn't work because of very small systems do not offer scale of economy. That's engineering knowledge that we have. So both systems doesn't work. So something in middle can work. And that we have to find out at a particular place, with the local context, with the people, with the community, with the local technology. So all that, to do that, if our government system ready to bring so much of things in one exercise, there is no time, hardly there is time, because they have to respond to the local needs of infrastructure immediately. So if you go and talk to them, they will say, go away, you don't have time for this. And that's what exactly happens when I go and talk to any commissioners or bureaucrats. This is what happens, and we get the outcome here. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. I think that's really important. I studied sociology, and I think throughout my training, my professor was only telling me to sharpen my problem statement because we jumped into what we should do, what action we should take very quickly, and then keep struggling on that end of the spectrum. I just want to bring in picture here since we were talking about the example of water and regarding problems. Also, how do you then look at this whole idea of a nuanced approach into thinking where, how do you choose, once you define a problem, how do you choose what action you do? Because when we think of nature-based solutions, it's a very generic way in which most of us understand it. But how do you make those decisions between the balance of grey, green, blue? And do you think there are steps that can be taken by localized institutions or authorities where this understanding of striking this balance can be mainstreamed a little bit more, or at least you can start looking at that of, how do you define the problem, look at the place, and then co-design what you would like to do in order to not sort of go into your natural instinct or known action of the brick and mortar kind of solutions.
For bringing that up. So I think everybody sitting will comes up with different set of recipes, right? So I think one thing as an MBS practitioner is that multi-functionality approach. So most of the times a lot of people are working in silos. And what happens is we kind of forget that any water body or any place that we're trying to design is actually an ecosystem. So let's say if we have to look at a river is not just water, but it is actually an ecosystem that brings in a lot of disciplines together. So according to me, a multi-functionality approach is extremely important when we are designing this. At the same time, I feel the part that you brought up, the way you are designing infrastructure, which you are working with before, especially in rural areas. I again feel that grey infrastructure is something that can't be a replacement. We really need it. But at the same time, we can't neglect the blue and the green. That's extremely important. I feel everything is very interconnected.
say if we use space in terms of development, especially for green infrastructure, that is required. But can we also look at alternatives in terms of the local material that is available? So that's one. Second is, if I have to look at the green infrastructure, which is let's say plantations or let's say making riparian zones around the water bodies, it unknowingly touches the blue zone by trying to control the water level rise or trying to minimize the flood conditions. So a lot of times with our expertise, we try to focus only on the perspective that we understand, but we are unknowingly touching on the other disciplines and the multi-functionality. So I think that's more important. At the same time, why I speak about multi-functionality is I also feel that it might turn us into a cobra effect, which is basically if we try to solve a problem unknowingly because you have expertise in one single domain, you might create multiple other problems. So I think it's very important to not work in silos and to work in teams. And I already see that there is a team here and thank you, for bringing us all together so that we can think in this way and not particularly individually or as individual experts. Again, talking about the context setting part and what Satya also touched upon, that we can't look at the political boundaries per se. So I also understand what the environmental science background that I have is we have to look at an ecosystem through a hydrographic zone. So we can't make replicable models. What works on the eastern coast can't work on the western coast. Though it's the coastline, though the weather conditions might have some kind of humidity or other things. So that part again I think is extremely important while we're designing the systems. Talking about the nuances, I feel after the multi-functionality part, the context setting again is extremely important. The replicability part when we look at has to be taught to the biogeographic zones only. Only then the context setting can happen. So yeah, that's it from my side. Thank you.
Yeah, you're right. What's the cobra effect?
Yeah. To give you a simple example, not the movie infrastructure example, is very, let's say it is summer afternoon, you want a cold feed, right? And just to get that urge of having that cold feed, you will change the settings of your refrigerator, right? Only to realize much later after reaching the cold feed that all your stock in the refrigerator has gone bad. So yeah, I think the similar approach, if you look at the multi-functionality approach of it, yeah, we'll be able to solve some problems better. Thank you.
What's the cobra?
I don't know, it's just called a cobra. Yeah, so it's a little
Sandeep, thank you for probably which is since we're talking about multi-functionality, I just also wanted to simply go and get a comment on streets and public spaces in a lot of these cities. When you talk about that, what in situ urbanizing, they have a rural character and past and often used in this way that you have very diverse user groups and they don't really always look at the same time. They cannot work with the same standards, patterns, and knowledge that works for each city. So, how do you see designing for localized functional spaces, urban spaces, open spaces where you will have these certain pockets of pocket park coming in, a 6 meter wide road where you play services, but also make it multi-use. So, how do you see working upon such spaces that you could draw from some of your work in cities like Surat, Varanasi, and others?
Yeah. So yes, yeah, thanks for that. I think if we go back to the definition of streets, they were majorly access systems of any place. They provide their vital role was defined as to provide access to a place. However, the Indian way of looking at streets is very different. I think what it looks forward to how India looks at streets and how India has been with streets in form of place, in form of a celebration space or local open space and so many multifunctional uses. And the more you go towards, say tier 2 or tier 3 cities, the cities become more part of their lives, they become part of their neighborhoods, they become part of their living spaces. So, if you really, want to check whether are we doing enough here, I feel I'm coming from practices that I've been witnessing. Probably in Gujarat, if you see, the major focus is on the top tier cities, the fastest urbanizing cities of the state, and the aspirations of this tier 2, tier 3 cities is almost regionally looking at Ahmedabad, looking at Surat as their benchmarks, and Nadia wants to aim Baroda wants to aim Surat wants to aim Ahmedabad, and that's the cycling process where a younger brother wants to always aim for, looking at his younger one that I want to be doing sometime soon. So, but in those aspirational journeys, probably the learnings are undisturbed. Like I think they're saying that some mistakes the elder brothers already made, and why does the younger brother have to follow the same mistakes? So I feel these tier 2 and tier 3 cities are the cities of tomorrow, which are the next set of urbanized areas, and it's high time that we focus on them. And the best part, or half class full side of it, if you want to look at it, is that we have some time to kind of mitigate the problems, provided we focus our energies towards that. So I think in terms of a lot of opportunities related to restructuring services, utilities, within limited resources, before the traffic congestion, the problems of the major urban centers seep into the tier 2, tier 3 cities. I think it's time that we maybe find policy mechanisms or maybe find management mechanisms that don't lead us to those congestion problems, and see streets as systems of place. So I think that is where we have to focus our energies towards. Yeah, thanks.
Your example of so one thing that we're all facing, whether it's big or small or however you want to classify it, emerging aspirations, is waste. I mean, nationally or state-wise, district-wise, I think we're all plagued by the problem of waste, no matter where we live. We wonder why it's not becoming personal enough. And I wonder, how do you how do you, Archana, if you could tell us a little bit from your experience on how do we build out decentralized solutions, or at least imagine an approach that we can look at some of these smaller cities which are still early in their trajectory of not having bigger landfills or downstream of issues of contamination of water resources. How do you think of decentralized solutions for waste and for people working in the waste sector specifically? You were talking about the cleaning waste and just the health problems associated with that, the lack of them being part of not just organized structures but governance where their services seen as something that really aids the economy but also should give them the kind of power and access to resources that they can keep their livelihood going. Like we talked about in one of our earlier sessions on economic development planning. If you could talk a little bit about that.
As always, waste comes as an output for somebody else to handle after all the discussion has happened. And I think that's where the framing of the question is about. Because managing waste can happen in the interlink, but we really need to imagine an economy actually where there is not that much waste between funds and commerce. So how do we integrate that? That's a problem that maybe can be solved by forming cooperatives, their access to waste, planning for their residences, urban planning, but the larger problem of waste is the economic development model that we are following. And like we were saying, every small city, every village wants to become a small city, every small city wants to become a larger city.
If you look at the variety Assam versus the variety UP, they might look different. But if you look at the cities, Morocco looks just like Guwahati. Right? So there is a problem of urbanization and the economic model that we are following. We think that governments can come in implement decentralized solutions, communities will pull in, say, I put a biogas, I do those things. But I think what we are missing is engaging with businesses because more of the economic development models are driven by businesses, right? And the higher your economic development, the more waste you get. So we need to imagine an alternate economy where these are happening. You don't have to assume that you will grow and you will generate that much waste and then you need to look at ways of managing it safely or data decentralized. So I think this whole imagination of growing in an alternate way, and that's where circular economy comes in, where you have alternate models of development, you have shared platforms, you have life extension through repair, you have things like reducing waste through, rental systems. I think those are the things that cities need to start imagining. And the smaller cities need to start thinking differently. And we need to have the governance system and we need to involve businesses. I think unless we involve businesses in this whole process, we will have them making EVs but nobody taking care of batteries. So you will have solar, but you don't know who will take care of your solar case. So I think the problem needs to be reframed a bit and managing this will happen in the interim. So we know that will happen with that. That's not the bigger problem. I think the bigger problem is the long-term organization of how we have to look at the economy and release that part.
I just quickly over that. When you asked Arjuna the question, in the question you said, why isn't it becoming personal enough? I think it is not becoming political enough, it is somewhere even here, it is personal. We need a political push for this. Political and economic, but we always say political and we say economic, I think this are the people who are making money from the whole thing, right? I think we need to engage them also because this is not an afterthought of something else. If we look at it like that, it will always be a problem. That something has to happen. So I do not understand the way, but after hearing all this, I kind of thought that the problem is much bigger than what we are doing.
Yeah, just to add to Ashna's point, I think there's also more awareness and acknowledgement of aligning corporate sustainability targets to public commitments. For example, City of Bangalore, WL is doing climate action plans in certain cities. Right? The climate action plan commitment is committed by the state and implemented by the city. So whatever the businesses who function in the city, their sustainability targets, even though they are kind of trickle down of the larger target, there is no alignment between the targets. Whether it is for freight, it is for private transport, whether it is for so I think there is an opportunity for us to come up with a mechanism where you get this, and some cities have started to explore what should the mechanism look like of getting internal corporate sustainability targets to add up to the public target that the government is making. And I think there is a gap where that very clearly then fits within waste, it fits within transportation, in terms of the goals, right? And it also fits within your energy decarbonization in terms of grid and your charging infra, and of course the last line tracking. So I think there is an opportunity for that. That's an economic opportunity because at the end of the day, we are then able to get businesses to start adding up because then they are part of the solution in terms of their own small ways because these all numbers add up. I think there's an opportunity for us to really help.
Thank you. So,
To come towards the end of the session, we can ask for a final comment, leading from all of you, but also see that is discovery. So, that sort of leads our data practice. So, a lot of the maps, the geographies that we saw, smart destinations online now, we learn with this team. But rather than just ask for final comments, I'm asking for your final comment as well. I think travel data mapping, informing policy, etc. What would you say is one nudge that we do? And this is going to be the same question for everybody. What's the important nudge to shift the discourse from the expertise that you're talking? What's that one thing you want to see done in the ecosystem?
Thank you. Apologies for delay. The session was actually on data and the issues around data. So it was, so I'll summarize what I was talking about. The thing about, I just made it so of course we need everything about data. It's the institution, the health, gas, and who we know it and everything around it is actually price and others requirement. But if I have to push two things, which actually from a pragmatic sense of how to make data work, I put two things. One is, unfortunately, the data institutions in our country do not have the creative leadership that can show good use cases. And here it has been like, they create data and they dump it, and after 10 years it will be all data and offer it. Unfortunately, a good secondary leader who can, we have the ambitious leadership, which allows the creation of data, but we do not have the creative leadership that successfully uses it and pragmatically applies it. So that is one. Second is that the amount of data that we are, everything around data is actually limited to institutions, big IITs and everything around it. I would suggest this is something that we are planning to experiment in we try to create something like centers of excellences, which is there, but with local universities and colleges to create and act as they do their data part instead of one big mega institution doing it. This is actually something that they do in this. Each team with one college, each geography with one college. I don't think we are experimenting and we are building the data and exposure to a few institutions that think these centers of excellences and want to really look for the data institution and see the recipe of things.
Thank you, Rajani. I think we've spoken about the layer of databases and dashboards that they created depending on what applications get. But I'm just going to ask you to raise hands because I'm not sure who's ready, and I just asked this question. What is that one nudge in the system that you practice for this episode?
I didn't, but it's okay. I'll go. No, I think more than a nudge outside, I think what I would like to try to work with that we think is important to me. And one of the things that I just see is that a lot of there is now awareness now on this issue. I think 10 years back that was not the case. There is that, and so but at least I feel that there is business in the very aspect of the business point, the importance of business leadership and what can happen to communities. That there is now a fair amount of demand and some amount of capital that people want to put, and I feel it's a gap between, if I look at all the if the right leadership thinking is there behind what you do for capital, then joining the dots around some of these and the good implementation partners, that some of that happens. What we're trying to do, at least at learning skills, set it up as a research strategy advisory firm, which is, and there in that hat when I engage with company, the last question we are trying to give to them or to give the government is to look at this mix of data, capacity, and economic problem solving, and to see that as a route for development. So, in looking at these as pathways to growth and equity, and not think of it as an either or a zero sum game, but to see that both of them have things to add, and to have the top leadership start thinking seriously about this. Because now I think there are leaders who want to do very often the question is, how, who the partners will be, for the joining of the dots, or even that creative creation or creative thinking partnership what is where I think we can produce some amount of nudges and more partnerships and more people doing some of that is where I see some of the answers. Right. Sanjay?
Say form all the functions, fix the form of how the decisions are made, the function that we want, and how the city and the region should function. We come to right now that there are structural problems of how decisions are made and who makes those decisions. So governance versus government, distinction is important. And yeah, I think we have to fix the structure.
Thank you, Sanjay. In this case, in many other cases, working in smaller groups is seamless, scaling is problem. When we're talking about the city space, urban space, the easy part is that the key stakeholder and the stakeholder not to miss the family. If you set them on right and discuss the drivers of change right to the government, scaling will become very easy. The scale for change. So that's not to be missed. I can go on, but this is on the right thing. Thank you. Ashna?
I think people saying that money in the region, I think that's very important. People and why have them promote local always local products, local consumption. I think that too much. Right in your own region, to reduce your waste. Yes. Sorry, I somebody to the audience wants to say something. Yeah, please.
That's a question. I have a question. I just want to say the phase-based approach and the city region-based approach is just typically, the model has been messy that not exactly the root cause of the problem, but treating the symptom of the problem. And that we are thinking in terms of the city, like the daily problem has further gone to the Gurgaon, Noida and all. I think the approach has been need to be seen that only the approach has to be adopted or need to be think about what is the root cause of the problem. It is just to treat the symptoms of the problem.
May I call you on this, sir?
I'm RSC.
And
I'm a geography lecturer and I don't know the people are aware about it. Long back in 1959, there is the Golden Meta Committee. They had the regional-based approach to block development. I think that report had not been translated into action, and that is the problem we are facing. I mean, keep on treating a problem of the day. I mean, it will be ever-ending problem. The solution will not be able to use any solution. That's the meaning that we are just treating the approach has to treat the symptoms of the problem, not the root cause of the problem.
yes.
Yes. Ideas are there. I need to demonstrate many things. And we do have demonstration models. We did it too early. That's not a problem. I wasn't planning to do it. People who are track one plan. There is no successful third parties are managed. So how is that going to be a success? What is all the success? Yeah, I stayed the law now to say that okay, this is really a successful way of doing things and it is sustainable, economically viable, on scope. Those things are not there. And maybe that's where I was discussing with Vishwanath that we know how to spend 100 crores for a routine thing, but we don't know how to spend 1 crore on a innovative thing. That's the problem there.
So, please, what are the key handouts that seems like you're trying to for flexible and he's listening and try to see the qualities towards as you can. She have more confidence and to stay alive and active and do this and do not imagine solution that we do most consistent for the state and society.
We have to look at development and definitely see how the nature-based approach, especially the green blue and the framework that you were talking about, has to be looked upon through a world side rather than, as individual developing cities or regions. So that is, I think, something that's necessary. And then how we can collaborate with the local communities to see how that can be, monitored and maintained in the long run. So NDS and the nature-based approach along with the community-based approach. I think that's it.
Like I said, I want to also emphasize that tier 2, tier 3 cities and small and medium-sized cities are equally important, if not more, than the cities, and actually to challenge our investments, our communities to map the problem, also map the opportunity, and then work towards it. So I want to see some great small and medium-sized cities to demonstrate great public spaces, great streets in their own sense. So that's where I want to see the change happen.
Thank you very much. And on that note, we will conclude this session. A big thank you to all our speakers for coming in. And we hope to engage with you going forward as well. Like Eva said, it's not going to be one-offs. Yeah.
Just adding to this question of organizations, I just want to bring in the idea of how do we bring the conversation of gender in women in this. Like we talk about infrastructure, we talk about public spaces. So how do we bring in, like we talk about data, we talk about studies. So how do we look at gender disaggregated analysis and also the planning? So how do we keep bringing in that question? So that has come into the thought processes. But I guess how do we bring in more solutions, more models that could really inform better practices? And again, this also comes into the financial solution we talked about. Now there is starting coming. So how do we also bring them to also show in some model that also are for maybe women or persons with disabilities, also bringing in urban planning. And when we talk about waste, it's also because it is a domain of a certain people belonging to a certain caste and a domain being dominated by women. So how do we bring in these intersectional identities into these conversations is just I wanted to add.
Thank you for that. We did, actually did inclusion the first step in our previous discussion. We had a very good expert of this one, right, David? For it completely taken up. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.